You're traveling through another dimension. Dimension not only of curling foils, discourse of power level, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous cubicle space whose actual card counts and boundaries are that of imagination. That signpost up ahead. Your next stop. The UberCube Zone.
The scary door.
Welcome to UberCube, the podcast that we discuss all things stuff every day
Drinks.
on Fridays,
We
and
talk about
drinks and
Only drinks.
cards, and we talk about a lot of stuff.
We talk about stuff.
We talk about
and
stuff
things.
and things. We cover that pretty a lot, and then we do feelings and feedback and emotions and wizards. And
I have been known to share some feelings.
Yeah. We just had a whole thing about the audio. We had another marriage counseling. Thank you, May. Stu and I are going to kill each other from, hey, Stu, stop messing with my audio. And he's telling me he's not doing it. Apparently, you've got gremlins that are running around your PC.
I might do.
You might do.
I might do.
You might do. You ever wonder if they're maybe from
Look,
the
all I'm
UberCube?
saying is that there's only so many times that I can pry your fingers off of Stu's throat.
I'm just saying. So we got a doozy of an episode for you today, and it's actually a compilation of a lot of conversations that we've had cumulatively, lots of words that I'm just putting together, but we've talked about all these different ideas. We've had guests on, and I incrementally, like little tiny edges, I've picked up little bits of knowledge, and I'm ready to kind of disclose that. You know, kind of what I've learned. Say we'll have JP on, and, you know, May and JP will have this whole tirade they'll go over about a certain subject, and I'm quietly listening, going, wait a minute, they're right. And then maybe Stu will be talking to, say, Nathan on the most recent episode, and I'm thinking, there's something to pick up here. Well, it's funny how those little edges just kind of build up. They pile up, and it makes like an earworm, and I can't get rid of it. And I'm thinking, you know what, they're right. And one of the specific things that we talked about very recently was aggro as a ballast point. And I know we talk about that a lot, but there's a reason for it. But before we go any further down this conversation, we are going to do the thing that we always do here in the UberCube Zone, and we're going to enjoy our refreshments of the day. And we're going to start out with the absolutely lovely May, who has been, I mean, you literally got a three-peat this week. You've been on the trifecta of Cube podcast, your Cube podcast for hire. What shows were you on? It's been a lot.
Well, I've been obviously here.
Really?
But I also was on the Cube Reviews.
I know, I have a hard time with that one too. Cube Reviews.
Yeah, and then the other one was Recross the Paths, which I also was on, which is interesting because we coordinated recording those at different times, but I just find it particularly funny that they both released within the same week.
Yep.
So people are just getting an abnormally high concentration of me. And whether or not that's a blessing or a curse, I will let you decide.
It's a blessing.
I know.
Come on now. No one in their right mind is going to call that anything but a blessing.
I listened to him while traveling back and forth to an account this week, and I'm like, that's May. Wait a minute, she's talking about the Fey Cube. But what was interesting is you talked about the Fey Cube. Like, you referenced it on ours. You talked about it specifically on the other two. But to your credit, and I know you don't listen to the sound of your own voice very often or what you talk about. You kind of just like, you record, you pass it off, we go. What was really cool, though, is you really didn't cross topics very much. You had something new to say on each one of them. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but just because I listened to all three of them like it was a movie, I'm like, these are almost like different movies, didn't feel like a sequel. So kudos to you, because I would have screwed that up so hard, not going to lie. You know, if Stu and I were invited on podcasts, for example.
I try to make a note of not just like repeating the same points, even though I'm talking about the same topic, just because, one, I don't think that that's very interesting conversation points, and two, I just don't want to talk about the same points over and over and over again until I shrivel into dust, right? It's just way more interesting or engaging to talk about like different facets and different angles of the cube, and when you have such a diverse set of data and whatnot, it's easy to have more things to talk about. I try to lean on that.
I get that. There's a lot to talk about, though, isn't there? When you really put it down, you can talk about why you made card decisions. You can talk about why archetypes exist. You can talk about your grand vision for the cube. You can, there's a million things. I mean, we could probably fill 30 episodes about each of the cubes that you guys... I could probably fill a few episodes just with the decisions that I've made about a cube that I haven't even finished yet.
And if you did one more podcast, you could have gotten an EGOT. I'm just saying, but you didn't. So
I don't think they give Tonys out for Magic podcasts.
We do sing on here.
We do.
We do.
I think there's more to the criteria than that. Maybe we'll go for the Grammy. Maybe that's a little more achievable.
Maybe we should do video.
If I won the Powerball, I would definitely buy us a Grammy. How about that?
May,
Someone help me.
What are you drinking, May? What are you drinking, May?
So, unfortunately, I might just be drinking glorified bathwater. The problem with sometimes making your own tea blends is sometimes the tea blend doesn't quite get you there. I tried going for jasmine lavender, and I'm not sure whether or not it's just underbrewed or if I need to add something else, but right now it's just kind of...
Yep.
Yeah, it tastes like bathwater.
Sounds good.
Maybe it's like a double bagger. I have teas like that where I'm like, even in just a normal sized mug, it's a little spoon of sweetener and I'm in a double bagger situation. I got to put 2 in there to get the flavor out of it.
So I think it needs like a rose hip, or it needs, maybe I could try hibiscus in it. Just some kind of a fruity note to help offset the flavors of the lavender and the jasmine. Because lavender and jasmine kind of get mixed with each other, apparently. So their individual notes aren't quite prominent, unfortunately. What are y'all drinking?
What delicious beverage are you having, Stu?
So I have brought, and I brought one for you, so I'm going to actually read yours and give it to you as you look at me with such disdain of that I'm forcing these delicious beverages on you.
I was not overweight till I got here because I brought a low-cal beverage, and now he's giving me an IPA.
Well, now you're drinking a Juicy Monkey IPA from Victory Brewing Company. It's just an easy drinking little 9.5% IPA. So there you go, Anthony. We'll see how you conduct yourself for the rest of this episode.
Oh, dear God. And I guess I'm having a Juicy Monkey. I don't know. What are you having, Stu?
I'm also having a Juicy Monkey.
So what we're going to do is a little bit of bait and switch here. Again, kind of very much like when we talked about Nathan's cube. We talked about the almost legendary, I guess, air quotes, 2.0 cube. We're not going to entirely focus on the cube, but the fundamental ideas that are driving it. So while we will be focusing-ish on UberBear's Artifact Cube that will be featured at UberCubeathon on April 26th in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, 64 players, 17 cubes, will be Swiss. Met with the store this week. Got some maybe some super secret news that may or may not go through that I can't share, but I'm dying to share, but we'll find out if that actually transpires. That would be amazing. But until now, I think we're pretty amazing already. We've got a Taiga. We've got a CubeCon ticket. We got things, right? So
prizes are pretty outrageous, let's be honest.
So the listeners are just love hearing about UberCubeathon, but there is a reason for focusing, again, the drill downs on these particular topics are kind of bent around how we're all prepping for these things. We've got a lot of cubes, 17 like I mentioned. Each and every one of us are trying to get our playtest in, our ideas, and we're going to do some... It's the whole thing. The same conversation will kind of occur, like when we went to CubeCon previously. In May, you went through and what changes should I make? And we talked about that. It's kind of getting ready for the big event, right? We're kind of like doing the workout before you go get married, the wedding thing, right? Where everybody starts suddenly going to the gym. That's what we're doing is Cube Gym. That's stupid, isn't it? But
I actually like that. I actually like that Cube Gym.
It is.
Strengthening the cube for the big event.
We're just getting those stretch bands.
Get those biceps. Work on those glamour muscles.
Buy some really expensive shoes that you just
No, I'm with Stu on this one. That's a good comparison.
Yeah.
So as we kind of prep for that and we're getting ready, this is when I told you this was going to be a compilation of a lot of conversations. So for any of our listeners or those that listen to us regularly, and if not, I encourage you to do a flashback. But we had Justin Parnell on our episode. We're kind of talking about the cube with no name. And we're looking at that cube. He originally, the whole bit was he sent me and called it the Artifact Synergy Cube, right? So I'm doing my drafts and I'm looking at my things. And one of the things that kind of came up during that conversation was, hey, Justin Parnell is running Simulacrum Synthesizer. I'm going to read this card. We're not going to do a lot of card reading today, but Simulacrum Synthesizer, which is we were joking about, it's like the amalgamation motion masher. But for 2 colorless and 1 blue, you get an artifact. When the Simulacrum, that word, enters the battlefield, scry 2. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with a whole lot of words on it, apparently, that this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control.
It's a construct. There's a saga token.
It is. It is. And the big takeaway was, we tried this out a while back, and Stu did it. You did it one time. We played it once. You redlined it. It showed up on Moto at one point. You said, maybe this card's too good. It was the whole thing. Then I saw it in JP's cube, and we brought it up. We talked about it. And one of the explicit points that Parnell made was, if your cube is too slow, maybe this could take over games. Would you agree that my cube's a little slow? We got a lot of things to talk about here, but.
Well, let's first of all state that back when I very willingly and very happily abused the crap out of this card, like I felt like was an available play style and an available win condition, I would argue that yes, your cube was slower than it is today. It was less combo-y, if you will, maybe. I think there's always been a good amount of combos in there, but I feel like the combos were a little bit more clunky or a little bit more difficult to set up. I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore, but I managed to just maybe even get lucky. I drew into this card. I had those 3 or greater mana value artifacts, and I was able to just go nuclear with it on more than one occasion. And at that point, I thought, okay, I agree so much, and I can't put things as elegantly as JP can, but that was, I think, the perfect line for it. If your environment is slow, if you're not expecting things to really go ham sandwiches until turn 5 or turn 6, and you've got something like this that can come out, maybe turn 2 with a little bit of acceleration, turn 3, turn 4, you've got those insane value pieces that are coming out just from organically playing Magic, then yeah, that is an environment where you're going to see this become a little bit too abusable and a bit too fast.
To kind of put it in perspective, CubeCon, it's been in CubeCon 3 times, and they finally started doing labels around this last one, and this one in particular was labeled a mechanical build. Like, the cube itself was mechanical. You were Vorthos, right, May, with the fake cube, to put it into perspective? Everybody had like an overarching kind of, how do you classify these different types of cubes and what names might you use? And the fact that this was mechanical kind of resonates with me a lot, because a lot of the play styles, and something I've been very proud of in this cube, is I describe it as being complex, machine-like, synergistic. You're building like this amalgamation, this kind of gyro type machine where you're getting these pieces to do something, whether that be like modular or some other form where you're doing like the new Vorapede that came out, or etc. You're making incremental gains, you're making robots, you're making mechs.
What I think is interesting about this conversation in particular is how you can go from exactly what we're talking about now and go all the way back to when I said, you can have all different types of discussions about individual cubes. I look at a card like this, and you know what card, interestingly, immediately comes to mind was Marionette Apprentice. Marionette Apprentice is a card that has, it's adjacent, right? Its older sister, Marionette Master, right? Very similar kind of thing, but quicker, allows you to go nuclear with a combo a turn or 2 earlier. Cards like that, you put that in your cube because you think, okay, here's something that organically can go in the cube because it enables and acts as an engine piece for a combo, but it comes out sooner and it's sped up a combo. It's sped up a win condition. And that just by itself can make a big difference on how not just broken, but even maybe how viable certain cards for you start speeding up a bunch of combos in this cube, and all of a sudden Simulacrum Synthesizer is not even broken anymore. It's maybe even a fair card. And I would say right now it probably is a fair card.
I'm going to ask May to put a cherry on top of that, because we were going to go down this grindy path of aggro was the ballast point, and you had a flashback conversation you wished to pull up that's super relevant to this conversation.
Yes. So during our last episode, we were talking about the almost legendary cube, and the conversation that came up was, does aggro have to be that central balancing point to kind of keep these other decks in check? And the answer is no. It doesn't have to be. It's a good default. I think that it is a thing that curves out well. It does the thing early, and it can keep a lot of these like greedier decks pressured. And in a lot of environments, aggro tends to be that good default because it kind of keeps a lot of these more aggressively greedy decks in check. And that's not always correct, right? Because if you look at, say, reanimate packages or really good ramp packages or whatnot, when decks are able to curve into bigger, scarier things than whatever the value player or the 5-color player is trying to do, then it can kind of keep those decks in check. Now, the reason that it's relevant for here is that before we had that conversation, a lot of your takeaways from before, because we've mentioned this a few times, of aggro's a really good centralizing balance point. Of you can tell a lot about how a cube functions based off of how good the aggro package is. And your initial takeaway from that was, hey, let's add more aggro to the artifact cube. Which, to be fair, I'm not taking back that recommendation. I still think that it was a good addition. But I think that the whole reason that we're starting this is because of the kind of consequences of the choices that we've made along the way and what we can learn from that choice.
So I wish I could give you a resultant on what we're going to talk about now. We went to SCGCon, and Stu was asking about some of the cards that have now been added that we're going to talk about here in the very short future. And one of the questions he had asked me was, what was the result of adding some aggro package to the artifact cube? And frankly, he and I were out with Emma Partlow and our good friend Chris, aka Sandwich, and we were having some drinks at a local food hall. So by the time we got, they wrapped up games. So we did get some pictures of the decks. In this case, I guess Kirby was victorious with some kind of, if I'm not mistaken, from memory, some kind of aggressive Mardu-ish type of thing or whatever. But it's neither here nor there. But I did notice some of the components of the aggro package had now existed. And one of the things that I kind of got from our good friend Sandwich, and this is what's kind of sparking this conversation, was he didn't have time to set up, didn't have the time to build his machinations and go nuts. I'm going to go one step further, that our good friend Christian was trying to do a Metalworker deck, which was, I believed, at the time, a potential scourge in this cube. And still may be, right? It's still going to have its times where people can go nuts and lay down a lot of stuff. And he said, my deck was just too slow. I was getting too much pressure put on me. And I'm okay with that. I want to switch gears for a second, Mike, because I know you have a thought. I'm playing off of one of your original foundational principles about the fake cube. Mine's going to be less, what's the word I'm looking for? Focused. I don't have the waypoints that you cleanly have, but you discussed a long time ago about how you have certain like point cards. Here, I'll put it into a real world analogy. So I do a lot of speeches. And I go up on stage, and there might be 450, there might be 500 people, there might be 12 people, but mostly a lot of people. And I use this kind of weight and measure system where if I took my hand and I could reach it out in front of my face, I'll basically be able to see 5 people pointing out in a distance. And I will choose those 5 individuals, those 5 waypoints within that audience. And while I'm doing my speech, I will watch to see what their facial expression is doing. Meanwhile, the person in front of them thinks I'm making eye contact with them, but I'm using this little speech trick so I can tell how my speech is going, whether or not I should do some kind of, random dad joke in the middle to lighten the mood because maybe I'm losing my audience because one of my 5 pillars is collapsing on me, or I can see from their body language they're not following or tracking. So going back to the fake cube, sorry, the pollen, by the way, the audience is absolutely murdering me. Everything is yellow, but I'm pushing through this. But using that, you had like some foundational components. So I'm now going to use Simulacrum Synthesizer. I thought it was going to be Metalworker, and it still may be, but I need something to kind of wrap my brain around as that threshold point of what if people had all the time in the world and they could build the biggest, strongest army. And this art fits everything aesthetically I'm trying to do with this cube, all the way down to the mechs that are being popped out of this like giant whatever sphere that's implanting them onto whatever planet they're on. It's amazing. And now I'm going to use that as my slowest deck, but also my dominant deck, right? If it went nuts, we'll call it a control deck of some sorts. Now I'm going to go to something. What if I put something on that and challenged it? That's where I'm going with this. So May, before I go any further down my rant, could you please explain in a much better way I did how you had these waypoints? You had pillars of the fake cube. Kind of this idea, I guess, as a concept.
Yeah, so it is a fundamental design choice that I tend to take with a lot of my cubes, is that I have sort of, let's say, power pillars, right? it's not to say that let's take the Bomby star cards of, yep, these are the impactful cards, these are the archetype cards. That's not what we're talking about.
I have a very important question, though. If one of those power pillars is a cat, would it be a caterpillar?
Anthony will not be joining us for the rest of the episode. He is drowning in a bathtub. Mate.
Anyways, the point of the pillars is not as a reference point of power or as a reference point of an archetype or a reference point of a certain like deck that uses those star cards as a finisher. No, the pillars are things like, for a long period of time, Sarah Angel and Shivan Dragon, which unfortunately finally have been kicked to the curb. And yeah, I know. But the reason why those pillars existed, and I still feel like that they were a good foundational principle when the cube was first starting to get traction, is that I wanted to create an environment where it still feels good to play Shivan Dragon, Sarah Angel, whatnot, where a lot of these older, slower cards that tend to get pushed out of a lot of modern cubes don't really have a place. So when we are looking at your cube as an example, and we talk about the pillar of, say, Simulacrum Synthesizer, right? This is a good card. It's a strong card. However, what makes that card strong is when you have all the time in the world. So when you have your entire environment that's consistent of decks that are dirtily trying to build their engine and do their own weird things, then this card becomes obscenely good. In the same way that, like, if you look at older like cube sets and whatnot, where Sarah Angel becomes one of the best cards in the cube because creatures just weren't that good at the time, right? It goes from the pillar to that star, to that bomb, whatnot. And the reality is that it's because it's contextual on your environment, and that's why it becomes a pillar of what your environment is. Because what is the point in which this card becomes the most powerful thing in the cube or the most base thing that you can do in the cube? For
kind of like something that people can visually wrap their mind around from a design perspective, you can think about it like kind of like a compass rose. You could, I mean, I know that's not a layering idea, but you could say this represents my north, my south, my east, and my west as my pillars of design, and then everything else can fall within degrees of that, right? And within that, it's kind of fixes itself in such a way. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Okay, so now I'll ask something that's quite specific to this card, to follow on from that, right? You mentioned that this would be good in a blue deck. It's a blue card. Control Shell, maybe. So if you're going to tell me, because let's say I've sat down with your list and I've said, oh, Simulacrum Synthesizer, this is a cool card. What do you expect me to do with this card, right? And you say to me, oh, this is good in a control deck. And I think, okay, cool. I know what a control deck does. It attempts to control the game, hence the name Control. So do I have 3 mana counter spells that I'm looking to play? Well, no, that's not going to work because it's not an artifact spell. Do I have other 3 mana artifacts that are going to control the game in some way? It needs to, because otherwise I'm not playing a control deck. I'm maybe playing a mid-range deck. Is there an environment where this is at the lower end of the tempo-y kind of pieces, right, where not really much happening is before turn 3, then okay, I would say this is a foundational piece of the cube in general, not even just the archetype that it exists within. So I don't know if I would necessarily call this part of a control shell within your cube, unless you can guarantee to me that I have a lot of interactive artifact 3+ mana spells that I am going to be able to use to gain advantage, right? Otherwise, I'm going to look at this as a very complementary piece, almost a standalone piece. Like, hey, if you're building an artifact deck and you just so happen to pick this up and a lot of the rest of the cards in your cube are 3 mana artifacts, or a lot of the rest of the cards in your deck are 3 mana artifacts, then that's great and everything, and I will be very happy to use this because it has so much power built into it. But What if I don't draw this? What is the rest of my deck going to do?
That's what I was going to say. This card has a lot of problems with like timing restriction. It has to have pre-entered before you've done your additional 3 mana values. That's part of the problem here.
That is not just a part of this card's problem as well.
But there's a but. If we're going to simplify this card and distill it down before we even go on to the next piece, is when Simulacrum Synthesizer enters the battlefield, scry 2. And I know that's not exclusive to a control deck. That's just top deck manipulation. We're going to use that. You could complement this with a Force of Will. This is literally a card that rewards you just for playing the cube. You don't have to have high stakes to include this.
No, but you're not really complementing your deck with a Force of Will, because I'm not getting a construct out of a Force of Will.
No,
I'm just getting a control piece.
I'll pitch this to a Force of Will.
I would also.
This can lean a lot of different directions. It can go all the way. You could do this like almost like a borderline, like air quotes, artifact-centric brown town type of deck and not even worry about doing blue anymore. I mean, you can go mono blue and this could be your only mono blue splash. Doesn't matter that much. It's got a lot of timing restriction to it because it has to it's the cart before the horse scenario with this card. It had to have come out at least exceedingly early so you can get that value. This is not something you want to see late game, but if I am playing and it's what I got, I'm either going to pitch it or I'm going to scry it too. I do like that utility portion of this card. Would you agree?
I like the utility. It's not great,
but it is here.
I like the utility. It's okay.
It's medium,
right?
But it's a dig.
It's medium.
You get a dig.
It's medium.
But it's setting you up for your next plays. That's the whole idea of it. It wants you to stack those mana value 3 or greater.
All right. Yeah. It could be, right? So not disagreeing with that. So now, again, thinking about it from a deck building perspective, right, which in context is the rest of the cube, how am I going to implement this in a deck where I need to make this card work, or even just that I want to make this card work, right? Again, is it a pillar? Is it a foundational piece? Or is it just a very, very linear kind of, not linear necessarily, but is it a very fringe piece whereby if you so happen to have a deck that exists within another archetype where there are a bunch of other 3+ mana artifacts that exist organically within that archetype, and I can get value out of this, even if whatever other synergies I built within the deck didn't materialize because I didn't draw them or whatever, now do I have this supporting piece to make that work?
So I want to lean back to May's thing. We're going to call this for now kind of the boogeyman of the cube. We don't know if this can or can't be. It depends on the speed, right? This is timing based. So we're going to say that this is the long game, right? The whole idea of this is theoretically long game. You want to build up amass your sources, your resources, your creatures. This requires longevity in the game. That's why, before I even go any further down this rant, I'm just using timing as a scenario. Let's just do pure time. I don't even want to go down the path of like talking about magic. I'm saying aggro represents, we'll say, milliseconds. We'll say mid-range represents minutes. And we'll say control can represent hours. I'm trying to like do a visual time cue, a timestamp, and I know that's all non-realistic, but each one of those have time equivalents as to when they come out in the game. One comes out fast, one comes out next, one comes out theoretically. When I look at a card like this, I look at this as the long haul of the cube. But also devastating if it gets out of control.
All right, I have to interject this. Maybe this was Freudian, or maybe not. But I love the time units that you used in that comparison. Milliseconds, and then minutes, and then hours. All right, the 60 minutes in an hour.
I realize I
Do you know how many milliseconds are in a minute? But
we'll let the seconds go. I do actually. But yeah.
Well.
3,600?
Because
no, 60 seconds and 3,600.
Even
15
still,
quarters. I got it.
It doesn't matter. But I don't really want to get into the next portion of my speech and my rant until we've had a chance to go past the simulacrum synthesizer bit. So I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
I will leave it at this. I was going to let you cook, and now I want to take the pan away from you. But I do think that the focus on time is the important part here. Because, like I mentioned, just ever so briefly, was that this card is very scary when the rest of the environment is also at that pace. Because if the rest of the environment's starting to do things around turn 3, this card becomes the scariest card in the cube. However, that is no longer the case because you fleshed out the aggro package. there is now something that actually actively puts pressure on that. Now, that being said, I actually did think of the follow-up to this because I have been playing 4D chess while you're playing checkers. All right? So, I'm going to hit you with a very, very pointed question of why do you not have more artifact control pieces in here if this is supposed to be a blue artifact piece, right? So let's look at some of the very specific examples just in this cube. And I promise for the listeners that this is going to be at least somewhat interesting for like your own cubes, all right? When we're taking our top-down approach and we look at this card in particular of artifacts 3 mana or higher. Okay, so in blue, and not even just counting like the colorless cards, obviously we have 10 3-drops, 2 5-drops, 4 6-drops, and 4 7-drops, and then we have 4 for the creatures, that is. For the non-creatures, we have an additional 7 3-drops, an additional 4 4-drops.
Are you sure you're looking at my cube? I'm seeing something different. What were your counts again? I don't see these counts. How many drops? I see...
You have 17 total.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Just non-colored artifacts that are 3.
Roger that.
Then you have 4 total 4-drops. Then you have 7 total 5-drops, 4 total 6-drops, and 4 total 7-drops, not including blue.
And a partridge and a pear tree.
Yes. The reason that this is important, because when I look at this card, I see it as this is a toolbox card. When you are doing the repurposing bay thing, which for context is basically the pod equivalent for artifacts, right? You have lines that you can like follow down in order to use pod, in order to progress your game plan, and every time that you do that, you get additional constructs, and eventually that can just overwhelm the game. So you can hold up interaction, and then when you have nothing better to do, say you already used your interaction, then at sorcery speed, you could just kind of use that, right? It's a way that you can progress your game plan. But when you have a bunch of things trying to interact at instant speed, and then a bunch of things that are coming in at sorcery speed at 3 mana or higher, where's the toolbox? Okay, so we have Chrome Horse Seed Shark, which rewards you for casting non-creature spells, and that's really good in control court. It doesn't require any other pieces to do the thing, right? As opposed to, say, Possession Engine, okay? Possession Engine is a 3 blue for a 5/5 vehicle with crew 3. When it enters, gain control of target creature an opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. But the important part is that it removes problematic cards at sorcery speed. It's tutorable with that repurposing bay. It's also a 5 mana artifact that lets you accrue value while also denying your opponent resources. That is a good control card. But when we look at some of the cards that you have in here at 3 or more, what's your line? And that is actually me wanting you to question here. Or wanting you to answer my question.
That was a lot of stuff. So we're going to just try to do this. You asked
I promised it has reason.
There was a lot of things in there. You want to ask me what's control inside of this subset of blue?
Can I actually...
Thada?
Can I follow up with that?
I'm lost. Keep going.
No, let me follow up.
Fix it.
Because this is fantastic, okay? And I'll follow up with a question. So, because this is so important when judging a card like Simulacrum Synthesizer. I would take that card, and then I would look. And just because it's on the top row of Anthony's cube, as we're looking at it on Cube Cobra, I'm looking at Master Transmuter. 3 colorless and a blue, artifact creature, human artificer. Pay a blue and tap it, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. You may put an artifact from your hand onto the battlefield, right? That's 4 mana, satisfies the requirements from Simulacrum Synthesizer, so I get my construct, right?
Yep.
Allows me to get an engine going to try and make things happen, right? So I've paid 3, got my synthesizer, paid 4. Okay, can't activate it that turn. That's unfortunate. But on turn 5... I then am able to bounce this back to my hand for only 1 blue, put another artifact into play, and then maybe I've even bounced the Simulacrum Synthesizer, and I get to replay the simulacrum synthesizer to try and get more value again. Are those the kind of lines? And I'm asking you as the curator, was that a line that you considered at some point?
Not with the synthesizer, no.
Okay.
But generically speaking, the type of machine you just did is a consideration of the entire cube.
Yeah. There
are so many different combinations or permutations of the machinery within this cube that goes unchallenged. What he just did, though, sounded so simplistic. He said it with that beautiful British accent. It sounded so expedient. The reality of it is that was a lot of turns and a lot of time you just did in that one conversation.
It was
unchecked. I'm just going to do what I want. I'm going to keep playing this master transmuter. So you're jamming. This is kind of my point. Let's get away from the timestamp because I know, or even the word control because I know
let's not move on too quickly from that because I want to know, does that sound like something you want your cube to do?
Well, yeah, I wanted it to be a machine. It was always a machine.
Do you want it to do that specifically with Master Transmuter?
Well, I didn't know that existed until you said it out loud, because that's what's so wild about this cube, because everybody else is seeing like 1,000 other lines. This cube is way smarter than I am. Let's start with that as a base, right? Like, everybody that stares at this cube, some people just like, most of the negative feedback I get from this cube when I do occasionally get it, it's not because this cube sucks, because I don't understand anything, how to do anything in this cube. And I just want to tap them on the back and go, yeah, I get it, right? I mean, I don't, it's like that. There's so many things going on, so many lines. I wanted to challenge those lines.
Well, hang on. All right, you say that. Not that I don't believe you.
We're going to play it tomorrow night. We'll see how good your lines are.
It's all very well and good that you say that you're going to, I appreciate you for my tap on the back. I just said that to you, right?
I see the line.
And yet, I still get my ass handed to me every time I play this cube. Can you explain that to me?
Had you put a little bit of control in there, like I'm suggesting, I don't know, counterspell, you might not have been so bad, but you're too busy trying.
Is it a me problem?
Well, it's everybody's problem. Before May had something she wanted to add.
No, it's a me problem. I'm going to put it out there. It's a me problem. I tried to be too cute with that.
The problem with this cube...
That's what I was trying to imply. Yeah. Is that you have lots of things that let you do kind of toolboxy and control-y things, potentially. And when you look at that card, Simulacrum, you're like, I'm trying to slow down the game. It's a control card. It kind of makes sense, but Stu is also correct. Because what Stu is saying is, if I'm having to hold up mana for my counter magic and having to hold up a bunch of spells without getting like an actual value out of it, how am I supposed to not get my teeth kicked in, right?
Yeah, but
I
counterpoint that because Stu does lean into the machine too much. That's just a generic thing. The bit he doesn't defend the bit very much either. He wants to turn the crank and have the gear go that turns the other gear, and it's unadulterated. And not to interrupt you, and I truly apologize for that, but he doesn't do. You do some, but not a lot of interaction points. You really lean into the machine when you play this. I've seen you do it, and others like it.
You are 100% correct, and that's how, honestly, 90% of the time that I am drafting, and that is a fault. Maybe I don't want to say a fault, but it is definitely a style that I look for something like that because I'm looking to have my fun. It's not I'm trying to win. It's I'm trying to have my fun with your cube. And I've only picked those two cards because, again, we're looking at the artifact cube on Cube Cobra. I see Master Transmuter. It's an artifact. I see that I get immediate value from the Simulacrum Synthesizer, and I have something else that I can potentially do with that. And you are 100% correct. But if I look at it and see that, I'm not the only person that's going to look at it and see that.
I want to offer something that we've went off tangentially. I had a point. We had kind of the thing, but this was something Bones just did. They just drafted my cube in the CubeCon Discord. Matt Belcher set it up and Bones, and they went through it, and Joe Anderson, and they played it this past Wednesday night, actually. And I had one of the deck list. Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me like this moment. But one of the things that was kind of neat, it's along the brain train that he's doing right now. And Bones embraced it, which is kind of neat. So Bones used Twitching Doll. This is a card I added in, and I'll give a reason for this. I'm going to read this card because it kind of matters. Twitching Doll for 1 colorless and a green. You get an artifact creature, Spider Toy. It's a 2/2. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color, put a nest counter on Twitching Doll. Let's pause for a second. In this particular subset, outside of signets and whatnot, and the mirrors that I have in here, I don't have Arbor Elves, I don't have Llanowar Elves. I don't have Birds of Paradise. I don't have all these things. So when I see something like this is a non-hateful green card that has some attributes to it. Then you tap it, sacrifice Twitching Doll, create a 2/2 green spider creature token with reach. For each counter on Twitching Doll, activate only as a sorcery. So it's a mana source. So I don't know all the game progression as the story goes, and I think I'm not going to screw this up too bad. Bear with me. So then Bones, somewhere in this game, plays Thunderous Velocipede. And I think we're going to get this right, but let's try it. For 1 colorless and green, get a 5/5 artifact vehicle with trample. Each other vehicle and creature you control enters with an additional 1/1/1 counter on it if its mana value is 4 or less. Otherwise, it enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it. Now, the best of my understanding, this was a machine.
Additional 3.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, it's an additional 3. That is not to be underestimated.
But
this is a huge game
He played into the machinations type idea, even though it's a counters version of it. And you're doing the flop. You were doing the how do I take Simulacrum Synthesizer, and you're bouncing it back and forth. But he did the green version of a machine. Yep. But ultimately, it's all. I mean, you could argue it's all a machine, but it's synergies. You tracking where I'm going with this? It's always a clock. It's always a machine in this cube.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I will even follow it up, because one of the decks that you wanted to mention was the fact that Mardu aggro deck that you kind of alluded to earlier. So you have a lot of sort of like really strong cards like Arabella in here, Volatile Wanderglyph. More importantly, the Cybermen Patrol, which gives all of your artifact creatures a flick 3 and whatnot. And the reason that all these cards, which loops us back to our main part of why aggro was introduced to your cube in the first place and how it became that kind of centralizing force within your cube, is that it started to act as a punisher against this Simulacrum Synthesizer, right?
Yeah.
Now, the way to bring this together is that we have our Mardu aggro, we have our Twitching Doll, +1/+1 counters, whatnot. What do those two decks have in common?
One has spiders and the other one's, I don't know. I have no idea. You're gonna have to
They curve out well.
There we go.
They have the cards to curve out before the Synthesizer Simulacrum deck does.
Are we back to time? That's what I'm going to say.
It's always time.
It's always time.
It's always
back to time. Now, what's particularly cool about this is that I actually think that the Mardu deck that went well, that's a good deck. I think the +1/+1 counter deck and the Twitching Doll deck, I think that's cool. I think both of those are cool things that should exist within this environment.
But can they?
I don't think it has to take away from the Synthesizer.
But can they exist? This is the question, right? And I'm going to go all the way back to that. Can they exist if you have this cube and you sit down and you say, right, draft the deck, and you've got the players that want to draft the engine deck, and maybe they want to have a bit more fun than the Mardu aggro or the Boros aggro players, can the players who want to assemble the engine and maybe not go 0 and 3 in their one cube night a month, can they exist in the same?
I'm going to argue that you can't have a purist deck of any kind. Like, I know everybody wants to build the perfectly streamlined ultimate machine in every cube, right? But you need to have interaction points. I'll defend that tooth and nail. Or and this is stuff I've learned, or protection counterplay points, right? Like, sure. you have to ways, like if you're running KCI, you got to be able to protect it. And I've provided you the tools.
To interrupt you, because you're going off on a tangent that is related to my point.
Well, Stu pulled me in.
I did that.
Regardless.
Sorry.
Focus. So bring your list back in. Synthesizer is one of your columns of the cube, right?
Yes.
This is a card that you want to represent kind of what the middle ground point of your cube is. It's a playable card, and you want people to feel good playing decks around it. So when we are looking at those two previous examples, right? And it's not to say, oh, well, people are going to try to figure out what's the most efficient engine, and there's never going to be a most optimized deck. That doesn't matter. The point is that we've now established that there are decks that have tools that curve out better before the Synthesizer comes into play. Now, how do we get the Synthesizer deck to interact with all those good curve out cards? And that's when I think that you should look into buffing those interaction points so people don't have to make the choice of holding up that interaction or whatnot. So that way it's no longer I'm having to put myself at a detriment by having to grab all these interaction pieces and whatnot and hope maybe I can get some extra value pieces with my 3-drops and whatnot.
I
right?
kind of understand what you're saying, but I don't want to lean too much into. You were talking about before some vehicle that would get you a payoff. It would take a creature, remove it out of the way. It got you that trick. Well, that's what's neat. I'm using kind of the idea of the that synthesizer, whatever machine it is, as kind of a construct idea. I'm not referring to it as the practical sense of the card. I don't want to add so many pieces that just fold into that mana value 3 or greater. It's if you drafted it, you drafted it. It's almost like I don't want to build a constructed deck within the cube that aligns with that card specifically. I just know there was a timing element to that card, a threshold. If it went unchecked, it would take over with the constructs.
And now it's being checked by aggro. It's being checked by the decks that are curving better. And so now that it's being properly curved, how do you get this deck, a synthesizer deck? We don't want to nerf it. We don't want to take it out. It's column to the cube. How do we get it to interact with the decks that are curving without taking away the new tools, right? Which is why I mentioned Possession Engine. It's proactive.
I lean more in towards the disenchant components, the counterspell components. That's where I'm going back to the control mechanism.
Let me not call you out. You're completely missing the forest from the trees. Completely.
I'm not going to lean into a component that surrounds
no. And I'm going to not to hijack the discussion, right?
Yeah, because I wanted to talk about that.
But here it is, right? What we're talking about is an engine piece, a fun piece, a potential pillar that you might mention in your cube. And I don't want this to be the roast of Anthony or the roast of Anthony's artifact cube, because what I want our listeners and what I also want you to understand is this extends way beyond just this archetype, just this card, just this cube, whatever, right? How do you make anything work, right? How do you build this within the framework of your cube where it's not just, hey, I know that I'm including these pieces in my cube because it's fun and because it's interesting and because it's dynamic, but if you draft this cube, you're going to get run over by the 21 drop and the 22 drop aggro cube. Aggro deck.
Well, let me pause everything. I'm hitting the pause button. I was not prepared for all the counterplays against this idea.
Anthony wrote an episode and then was like, hang on, you can't have an opinion that goes up against my cube. What are you talking about?
They didn't let me.
This is
shut up and let me talk about my cube.
This from me, my precious baby.
No, they've killed me on the bit. I'm unprepared for all these questions. I got invited to a baseball game, folks, or to come to a pool league, and I don't have a stick and I don't have a glove. So what I was trying to do with this episode, going back onto the pillar concept, I know there was a timing concept with that synthesizer. We're going to move off that thing now.
Oh, no. Well, all right.
You're not. I can't even progress. So there was a card.
And I'll go into a bit of an admission here. I mentioned this card as I thought it would be. I wanted it included. I thought it would be broken, but I still wanted you to include it for fun.
And I am trying to put the rails back on this train track.
There ain't no rails on this train.
We have went off the track. So I kind of want to just, let's close the loop. I'm going to close the loop.
Richard Kimball is in here, is in this train, handcuffed and ready to break out and solve the murder of his wife.
I was not. This is what happens for anybody that wants to do podcast. And if you decide you want to write a script and hand it off the others 15 seconds before we launch, this is what's going to happen. It's like I wrote a book and they're making a movie about it. But let's have fun.
I want this English guy on because he's got such a lovely voice and a nice bit of technology. But now he's making me uncomfortable because he's asking questions about my cube that I wasn't prepared to answer.
In my defense, we tried to get Hugh Grant, and this one showed up and they called it Hugh Grant. And
don't just blame me, because May is sitting there with that beautiful smile on her face,
you guys are
thinking,
having so much
fun. I did this just as much, and I feel really good about it.
I can never figure out where everything becomes a roast. We're always so sweet when we talk about the fake cube. All right, let's carry on, Keebler. So there was a card that came out, back to the just blow away the North Star idea that I was trying to do with Compass Rose, because it's been all destroyed. But let's go back to the aggro package, and we kind of just breezed over it like boop-a-boop-a-boop. But there was a reason for it, and it was all about the timing of that synthesizer, and it needed to be challenged. If I'm just going to pick two cards that I wanted to have waypoints, and I wanted to have, if I'm going to have this must exist, therefore in my mind, I'm going to have this other counterpoint that must exist. I do everything kind of in the idea of counterpoints without going down the whole sideways direction we can go with that. There was a card that came out in Doctor Who called Cyberman Patrol for 2 colors, 2/2, artifact creature Cyberman. Artifact creatures you control have afflict 3. If anybody doesn't know what this means, it meant a lot to me because I played Neheb the Eternal, one of my favorite commander cards. People hate it because I can win on turn 3 or 4. Whenever a creature with afflict 3 becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. When this card was first revealed, it was the time of the Twitter, and Twitter was still Twitter and all the things. And I remember it came out, and Dan Schneider said the same thing I said. I think he definitely posted it first because he has a devoid cube. Like, this is an insta-ban card in that environment. I, too, agreed. Insta-ban. I mean, think about it. Like, all my Thopters now that attack you go borderline unchallenged. You just, or any, the 1/1 servos that a lot of these things make, right? What is it? The Meridian Besieged, or whatever, that makes 1/1 servo. Now, it actually would have been like cannon fodder before. It goes zug zug. Now it's definitely cannon fodder with this creature in its existence. Turn it sideways. You block it, you're going to take 3. You're going to let it through. And then whatever combat tricks happen.
I could also not block it and just lose 1 life. Then swing back with my 2 and 3.
This card creates a very
tension piece,
obscure tension piece, yeah. And I was really apprehensive about adding that, or adding this to the cube. And the whole point of this episode wasn't about my cube, but it was about the 2 fundamentals. I'm trying to bring this back. I wanted Cyberman Patrol versus the Simulacrum Synthesizer as the 2 pillars of challenge, right? You've got one that's it's aggro-ish, and both of these agreeably in this cube die to every disenchant you can imagine. There's vulnerability to both these cards. They're not impervious to anything. There's no hexproof. There's no ward. There's no shroud. There's nothing, no indestructible. Nothing makes these amazing.
Damn. He's really hitting us with the dies to removal.
I know, but he is. It dies to lightning bolt. It dies to, it dies to everything. I mean, surely there's no problem.
This happens to be a creature. It dies to murder. We get it. But also, this also dies to abrade. So does creatures. Well, this also dies to disenchant. There's a lot more vulnerability to this creature in the sense that it's got types that are just vulnerable to that idea.
Let's talk about. This was, again, the big aggro update, right? You just decided to go full-on aggro with the Artifact Cube.
Ooh, that's good.
It's delicious. Anthony just opened our second treat of the evening, which I'm rather happy about. All right. I want to talk about Arabella, Abandoned Doll, Boros, 1/3, legendary artifact creature, toy. Whenever Arabella, Abandoned Doll attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. You want to know why I love cards like this so much as an aggro staple? Is that it's not just tap 1 mana, play a creature, tap 2 mana, play a creature, turn them sideways, tap 1 and then 2 mana, play creatures, turn them sideways. This is definitely an aggressive piece, right? That requires other things to make it super powerful, right? There's a life gain capability to it, which can definitely be problematic to say the very least. But I love cards that can be both aggressive, but not just autonomous at the same time, right? And I have built decks with this card.
It is an artifact creature, so by virtue it is autonomous. Carry on.
We're going to fight after this.
Anyway,
there's
a bat running in there right now here.
Yeah, this is a fun card to me. I loved this card from the second that it was spoiled. I thought this is going to be great in your cube. It represents aggression. It represents something that requires some build around, even, regardless of how effective you want a card like this to be. But it's strong and it's fun.
I want to argue against all this. I didn't see this being in this cube at all. And I think that's why May's making her facial expressions. And I'll ask you in a minute, but when this card first came out, I saw this in my hard cube only. I didn't even add this until recently because I have now went the way of the aggro. May, you have thoughts?
Oh, Arabella Abandoned Doll. Oh, how sweet. Cyberman Patrol. Hello, human resources. That is all that's entered my mind, all right? And I could not let that lie.
It's so accurate. It's hilarious.
They both do a similar thing, right? Just one is fun, requires you to do other things. The other one is just all of your stuff has afflict 3 now.
Yeah. But let's. Unfortunately, I'm going to ask all of you to join the weird, the ideas that are popping through my brain when I'm looking at this. I didn't see this card. I saw it from the horror aspect. I did look at it. I have this kind of template too that I don't I actually run kind of a rule, and this is going to be a little broken with these type cards, but I try my very best not to replicate cards within cubes. Now, as I say that, you can look at all my cubes, and you'll find Preordain, you'll find Ponder, you'll find Counterspell. So, yeah, I know you come at me. But what I mean is when I get these unique type of cards, I forcefully try to not have, like, overlap, because I have 8 cubes. I don't want them to feel samey for any reasons. I'm always kind of pulling back for that reason. So when this card came out, I actually made a deliberate choice when it first came out and I pre-ordered it, which cube that I wanted the most. And at the time, I made a decision. That was before this conversation, before all these ideas, before the welling of the Simulacrum synthesizer and the JP episode, and you guys telling me to bolster aggro, and I know you didn't. And all these things that all happened over time, I slotted it right into my horror cube. Because it's a perfect fit there for a lot of reasons, right? And now I've come back to it, and now I want to insert some pressure points, because these aren't real. I mean, these are aggro cards. I know that's an aggro card in a lot of people, but these aren't real, like what we think of the Savannah Lions and the Lightning Bolts, while they do exist in here. There wasn't that kind of real pressure point that you see in a lot of these cubes that really push. I have to kind of make concessions, and I think by comparison, we talked about Nathan's cube, we talked about the Almost Legendary, he ran into a lot of the problems too, where like he had Ishimaru, the first version versus the second version, and all these things. His restriction creates a whole limitation just on this idea. So I want to switch over to another card that I think is more of a glue cardish that I think May will find entertaining as we kind of come to an end to this idea. Is Goldhound. And Goldhound for 1 color, you get a 1/1 artifact creature, treasure, dog, first strike, menace. Sacrifice this, add 1 mana of any color. This type of card is, beside from all the things we've kind of went off tangentially and talked about, the synthesizers and Arabella and all that, these are the type of like cards that I can put in here that I can almost say, well, that feels aggro-ish, but it also feels like I just want to move forward because I get treasure. I also want to put equipment on it. I also want to sack it to KCI. I want to do a lot of things with this. It just branches off a lot of ways.
I mean, I think this is incredibly aggressive for, one red as a 1/1.
Until it can't be. That's my point.
I mean, let's be honest. It has first strike and menace.
Mm-hmm.
Those two qualities, those two abilities by themselves are pretty aggro.
Imagine if it had afflict.
And I would, are you really going to block a 1/1 though?
Good luck, synthesizer.
Can you? I mean, it's got menace, and it can sack itself and give you a mana. But it's flavorful. It's a cool card. It's very aggressive, in my opinion. It needs a little bit of build around. This is another kind of card that I think I can accept as part of your aggro package.
And we were pre-gaming May as we kind of, again, we're tying this off, but there was a conversation that you weren't quite in here yet for. He's like, Stu was like, Wretched Doll, it's for 1 colorless and a black. It's a 3/1 artifact creature toy. These are all toys. The toys are evil here. Pay 1 black, tap, surveil 1. And he was like, that's okay. It's a 3/1 body. It's aggressive, right? We'll call that aggro. And I know that's my version of aggro. And then my thing was until it's not, or it becomes utilitarian because you want that surveil 1, because now you're in that whip of Erebos and felled into the third path deck. So now you've changed.
Agreed, but I still
your aspects of a deck build.
In my aggressive mindset, if I'm playing that way, I just know that I have a 3-power creature for 2 mana, and I just want to keep turning it sideways and hopefully get rid of your 3 toughness 3 mana creature, or maybe even your 3 toughness 4 mana creature.
So I'm actually going to agree with Stu here because not only is it a 3/1 aggressive creature that you can use the turn sideways.
Sure.
Your main point of until it's not an aggressive creature, because, there are things that just have bigger butts. There are things that will come down that will shut it down, right? But it doesn't stop being relevant. That paying a black and surveil 1 makes it so that we can actually dig for your answers to get more damage in. And that is an important aspect to a lot of good aggro cards of what does this do when it can't turn sideways?
What do we do when the beds are burning? I actually heard you kind of talk about this in...
We burn the midnight oil.
I did. Where do we go?
When our beds are burning.
All right, so what we were kind of talking about, I heard you on your trifecta of nomadic podcast, special guest, May, actually talk about, you were talking about wolves, and I don't want to go down this road, but you were talking about how you were getting this blend of cards, all these toll smears and all these cards that found their way. Not only do I support elves, not only do I support wolves, not only do I support aggro, not only do I support mid-range, you were looking for cards that had unique attributes that found their way. It allowed the drafter that agency to say the Wretched Doll. We'll go back to Wretched Doll just for a second. It's not a Savannah Lion, where Savannah Lion kind of, unless you're playing some kind of cats deck or something that plays off that kindred aspect that says cats get something. Otherwise, it's a 2-1 for 1. This creature, like you said, when it runs out of gas, I now have the ability to surveil. Then I can run it over into my Whip of Erebos deck. So when I'm looking at my aggro package, you see how I'm still clinging onto that machine. Much like you talked about during your episodes, where your cards can be party, they can be a fairy. They can also be, and I know you want that fairy goblin. We're still waiting on that, right? But that would be the dream. But like things that can touch multiple points, it's not just, I guess it's this type of card and the cards that we talked about. Maybe Arabella does it more than most. It paints itself into a corner. I get that. But a lot of these cards don't paint themselves into a corner. You as the player now can mobilize it into some other effect. Do you agree with that statement before we progress?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, the next one I have, and I'm going to skip over a lot of them. There's a lot of, and I'll include them in the show notes, or you can look them up in Scryfall, which is probably a better way to do it. But this was another card that was interesting. And before we kind of break this down and come to a complete end here, is Nesting Bot. This card was talked about a lot because it's 1 colorless, a 1/1 artifact creature robot. Start your engines. This was the whole thing. Start your engines. This came out, and we had the Fast and the Furious set that just came out with Vin Diesel and all, Jace's gang or whoever, Chandra on a motorcycle. It is neat, whatever, cool, sure. But if you have no speed, it starts with 1. If it increases once on each of your turns, when an opponent loses life, max speed is 4. You know what I didn't care about? Any of that. Because I've talked about, or I've heard people talk about, in order to run max speed, you need to have a critical density to support this. Interestingly enough, when this creature dies, create a 1/1 colorless servo creature token, and then max speed, it gets +1. Again, don't care. Flavor text. If someone does it, good for them. If it happens, it happens. If the aggro package fires off, cool. I'm not going to put in this critical mass of max speed cards to make Nesting Bot any better than it is. What I see this is you complement this with some kind of form of an air quotes artifact aristocrat deck. This is a 1/1 for 1. It's not great. Put a piece of equipment on it. Turn it sideways. Attack them with a bone splinter.
Do you have that in your cube? Is there an aristocrats in your cube?
Yes, I very much have some version of ETB and LTB exist in this cube. And then also have a critical mass of, I've got a lot of artifacts going back to the synthesizer. That whole thing goes full circle. The constructs get bigger based on the quantity of the artifacts you have. So something like this is just cannon fodder to feed into the synthesizer, but also goes into the artifact. It's all a machination to a degree. It all feels the machine. So I'm not purist aggro. I'm still machine-like aggro.
I wouldn't play this in an aggro deck.
But you could?
I wouldn't.
I know you wouldn't. But
I cannot imagine a world in which just a 1/1 for 1 where the max speed is unlikely to ever happen.
I agree.
And even the dies to get a 1/1 is it's not just that it's ineffective, it's really boring.
100% agree, because you're not going to build a purist machine deck. You're not going to have that linear.
Oh, I am.
In my environment with, I know you will, but in this deck, you're going to complement it with things that have ETB triggers, LTB triggers, things you talked about Marionette Apprentice early on. That's going to be a kind of a pseudo aggro-ish, because you called it earlier. Maybe it's not about aggro. Maybe it's about the timing attributes of the curve.
Yep.
Did I get that right? Did I get all this right? That's what I'm spinning out.
You did, but the problem is that you are talking about a very convoluted way to get a very uninspired permanent in your cube to work. And by the time I've read the Start Your Engines text, the aggro player has sent me to the Dark Ages.
Because
I'm dead already.
Because of the argument of the restriction of being kind of folding back into more of this is an artifact-centric cube. And that is my restriction.
If you allow me to rope all of our points back into together in a nice little bow. Okay? When you put in the aggro stuff, do you feel like all these fun tools, decks, whatnot, do you feel like that it was a detriment to your environment?
Not at all. Although we were out drinking with them apart.
Do you feel like it's a detriment to the slower decks?
No, not in particular. I just wanted to have something that would challenge the grandfather clock, right? I saw too many of the metalworker type things having all the time on the universe. I wanted a few key pressure points, tension points.
Okay, so here's my main point. Remember how earlier I was mentioning about how, let's take the specific example of Possession Engine, okay? The reason I mentioned that is because that is a tool. It's not a matter of, oh, we need to fill out this entire constructed deck and like shove it into the cube, okay? This is a control piece. This is a card that works on its own. And more importantly, that it is a tool.
And I'm not saying for you to know what that card is. What is that card? You've been talking about. I've never even seen this in my life. What is this card? Please read it, because I have no idea what you're even talking about. I wanted to say this whole episode. What is Possession Engine and why do I care? Because is this from the new set?
I literally will say it again. It is 3 blue for a 5/5 artifact vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature and opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. It can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. However, you use that to crew the vehicle. Okay? The reason that this matters is that it is a tool that you can use for your curve out. So, the reason that I mentioned it, and the reason that we're tying this all back together, is that when you are establishing a sort of pressure point, which was kind of our ongoing buildup of a theme, right? Of whether or not that's ramp, whether or not that is reanimate, whether or not that's aggro. Point is that things that are happening on that early curve out of the game, what are these later deck engine whatnots going to do proactively to respond to feel like that they're not getting blown out of the game? And more importantly, is that an interaction point that you want them to have?
I have my curveball question, May's curveball question of the day. Why do I want to attack with my control magic and risk it?
Because you can.
Because I can?
Because you can.
Because I cleared the field?
Because
you took their blocker.
Because it's bigger than the rest of their board.
Does it have a flick?
You know what's real scary?
Yes.
Okay, good.
It has a flick
Ramp into a Possession Engine to steal their Cyberman.
I've never even seen this card before. It's fascinating. Okay, so
but listen, it works so beautifully, even from, and we're just talking so hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
Now we've identified a turn 3 play into a turn 4 play into a turn 5 play in a control-ish, not just a turn sideways kind of strategy. And here we have identified, here's a way to have some game against a 1 mana swing, 2 mana swing, 3 mana swing, 4 mana swing, right? Because very, very often, and go back all the way to when you said you do tend to really over prioritize these cutesy, value-y, how can I make this and that work, which I absolutely do, because I'm just trying to have fun. Because I'm just trying to have fun, right? But it's only so fun for so long when I'm thinking, okay, cool, I've got to turn 5 and I've played these turn 3, turn 4 pieces that are obviously in your cube for a reason because you've put them there, but I'm dead already and I can't do anything with these pieces because the aggro player's got me down to 3 life. And not just the fact that I am not able to have my fun, right? Or even untap and try and do something. I've had to block with these pieces against the aggro player because if I don't block and sacrifice them, I'm going to die I'm going to die this turn. So that's why I sort of question that, not just the entire aggro package, but just the inclusion of some of these and where they can fit. Because unless they can fit in a deck where you're able to do all of the above, you've got to have engine pieces that allow you to have your fun with that machination of the cube. And you've also got to keep yourself alive.
And I'm going to tie this off. We're done now. I'm going to say interaction, counter magic, removal, Stu. You can't just do the B in bread. So take us to the socials, please. Yep.
This episode was sponsored by You Just Get Counterspell. I've got 21 drops in my cube, but you better have the exact Counterspell and Force of Will in your opening 7 to support this combo and this engine that I've got in my cube. Otherwise, you're going to die. You idiot!
Just run more
I
counter magic.
think I rest my...
Just run more removal.
Yeah, just play removal. It dies to removal, bro.
When you remind them that not every card in your hand is Swords to Plowshare.
It's Patrick.
So... I hope,
moving on,
to all of our patrons, to Patrick, to Jeff, to Nick, to Chris, to Timber Dragon, to Brian, to Keaton, to Lord Justice, to Nick Lapointe, to Preston, and to Sam McKenna, a big thank you to all of you guys. And as Patreons, I really, really hope, above nothing else, that you have those Force of Wills and those counter spells and those unsummons in that opening 7, and to keep yourself alive before those aggro decks just wipe the floor with you. Again, as we've said in the last few episodes, we have got UberCubeathon 2025. This is happening April 26th. 64 players, 17 cubes, Swiss prizes. The Tiger is absolutely sensational. We've got a bunch of other very, very nice prize pieces, not just for our winners, but for people that are included in this event.
Last year, people had to walk to get food, which they still can. That's still an option, right? But now the store has agreed. I had a great meeting with the store yesterday, The Gathering Place. We talked about it. I sat down with them for a long time. They're going to do some additional prize support. I mean, these people are... They're amazing. There's more things happening. Like there's boxes and there's bundles and there's... I don't even know how we're going to manage the raffles. The raffles are going to be stupid. So even if you're not going to grind this out all to the end to get the magical tiger, right? That's altered in sign. Doesn't matter. Right now, before we even do more, we're already at 9 raffles. I mean, the percentages of 64 and you have a raffle ticket is going to get you basically like a signed...
magic card.
No, what the hell? Yeah, we're going to leave that. There's stupid magic cards. But we have a lot of stuff in here. But it's going to be absolutely amazing. We're down to, at the time of recording, I believe we're at 20 tickets, just under. We're ticking. The grandfather clock is ticking. We're coming up. We're under 29 days as of today's recording. I'm excited. I'm hype. I want to see a lot of people there. I would love to have some overflow. We'll make it happen. Whatever. We got cubes for days. And we're doing something on Friday night at Morgan Street Food Hall, which is in downtown Raleigh. We're going to get together. We're probably going to actually run out of seating there. We're going to move over to a pub next door. We're going to make it happen. It's going to be fun.
It'll be fun.
And I don't want to do reservations.
And ultimately, just to reiterate, from the man who said, just have your interaction, just have your force of will. If you weren't aware, you can walk and get food in America. We are a UberCube. We are here at UberCube, and TCG affiliate. You can use our TCG affiliate link that's in the show notes.
This is an NACL.
Help support the show.
This is sponsored by NACL.
Absolutely. You can go and join the conversation at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube. Over 1,000 members right now. A lot of cool conversation going on. You can use our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link for all kinds of playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, custom and large volume products available. You can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. We're at Bluesky, UberCubeMTGPodcast.bsky.social. If you've got a longer question or comment about an episode, UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, come hang out with us on the Discord. All kinds of fun conversation going on. And once again, patreon.com/UberCube. A huge thanks to all of the ongoing support. It really means a lot.
And other than that, we're going to say the thing we always say here at UberCube, which is affliate.